masters, masters, masters of change.
Hello there. Welcome to Masters of Change. My name is Kim Corneo and I'm the head of music at the Australian National University, and I'm here with my good friend Charlie Hogg, and Charlie is the director of the Brahma Kumaris in Australia. Welcome again, Charlie.
Thank you, Kim. Great to be here.
Well, we've been having such an interesting set of discussions lately about communication, and it's been like a path from communication as just a part of life, which is important, but then towards the spiritual dimensions, isn't it? And we've started to really look at some interesting ideas of how we listen better, and then how we resolve conflicts, and then how we serve others. They're all such beautiful topics. But it seems like we need to get right to the heart and the source of the matter, and the source is the divine. So I'd really like to have a discussion with you today about communicating with the divine. So I want to ask you, what is the divine to you, Charlie?
You know, Kim, the divine to me, or God, or Paramatma, or the Supreme Soul, is a soul like me in form, shall we say. So I sort of see myself as an eternal soul that came into this body in the womb. When the quickening begins, when the movement begins in the womb, about 4 to 6 months, that's when movement starts, that's when the soul comes. The soul takes on a body and acts through the body. But the Supreme Soul is a soul that never takes a body, never performs action, never reaps the fruit of actions. A soul that's eternally beyond influence and eternally pure, but a real soul. So like I'm talking to you, Kim, you're a soul who's communicating to me through your eyes and your words, and we're both interacting, seeing each other in a human form, but God is a real, living, pulsating, aware being like us, but doesn't have a human form. And so this communication with a non-physical being is probably the most high and subtle form of communication, because it's why always, in all the traditions, people to communicate with God did it in silence or did it through prayer or meditation, because it's subtle. And I think to really go inside, go into silence and through my third eye communicate through my pure thoughts and feelings, so that I touch, I connect, I feel, I'm close, I belong. To me, it's the highest form of communication for the human soul, this connection. And why even we call yoga is like a union. It's a communion, a communication of I, the soul, with my eternal parent, my mother, my father, the permanent beloved of the soul.
Charlie, to some people this would be almost like, I know this but I can't apply it. But to others, this would be a huge revelation, I think.
Yeah.
Because, I guess all of us, we've been brought up with some version of religion. Very few people are brought into a really deep, exalted spiritual consciousness. And so we often question what God is, fundamentally through our childhood, because we might see a picture, like with Judeo-Christianity, of this sort of, the big bearded man who, summons judgment on others. And this can be a really potent thing. Or even in mainstream Hinduism, where there are so many aspects of God, all these gods within God, that can be a really huge thing to work out where to define. But what you're saying is it's so simple. Can you say it again?
Well, I love the way you put that, Kim, because, I've been on a big journey with this. I mean, I found as a child, as a teenager, a bit hard to accept the notion of God. And I think that because we become so human, we're in a form, we make God in a human form too. And yet, if you really look at, all the great traditions, the common things is that God is light, God doesn't have a human form, and God is, the supreme amongst all souls. There is a lot of commonality. And yet, somehow I think because we want to connect, we've tried to make God in a human form. And what I've thought a lot about this, is that what happens is then that if we remember a saint, a prophet, whether it's a Christian or Christ or whoever, they are such virtuous beings. We know they're the highest, they're the embodiment of virtue and goodness, but they're still in a human form. So I sort of remain body conscious. And what I love about remembering God as that light, like even the form we have here, the form of light, is that I become my form of light. And that's really when they say in the Bible, God made man in his own image. God is an eternal soul, but he makes us a soul, the embodiment of virtue like him. It's not that he creates a human form, in my view. I love all the traditions, but for me it was confusing because there were so many different things said in all the traditions. I always found it hard to make sense of God, and in the end I found, for me perhaps, I thought there's a God that religions create, and there's God that's just a relationship. And to me, when I sort of separated them, I found it easier for me to access God.
Charlie, I want to ask a question that maybe some of our Indian viewers will ask. Because, you know, in India and, of course, in Indian communities around the world, the Gita is so beloved. I mean, it's such a magnificent text.
It is.
And some of the chapters, I mean, I love reading chapter 9 and 12. I think some of these chapters, they are so deeply inspiring.
Yeah.
But the Gita tells a slightly different perception of God. So, you know, where Krishna is revealed as this sort of omnipresent, omnipotent force around. But what you're saying is God is a silent observer of the whole universe.
Yeah.
So could you speak about the role of God in our creation a little bit?
Yeah. You know, Kim, I was actually, when I was living in London, I worked at Imperial College in the physics department. And at that time they were studying the quark, which was the smallest unit of matter, or they were trying to find that quark. And I used to have conversations with the scientists, and I say, well, was matter created? And they said, our understanding is it's eternal. And it really helped me. It's like this material universe always exists, but I think for human beings to understand eternity it's a real mind bender. And so we always feel, because our body is born and created, you know, we see it born and created, we can't see the continuity, so we think everything has to start somewhere. And I think that God's also eternal. God's an eternal being, and I am an eternal being. You are too, as a soul. And the little building blocks that build our bodies. And I think that the relationship between the soul and God has a huge influence on the material world and what happens. And when we, in a sense, we forget who we are, and we start to see the mountains, the trees, so many different gods and everything, and then that changes the whole dynamic of life. But when I really start to connect with God as the Supreme Soul, it's almost like the soul is charged, the soul is purified. And when many human souls become pure once again, we start to create a different energy on the planet. And I feel we're in this incredible time, and the Brahma Kumari's understanding of this is a time where God is influencing the world, and we're at this incredible confluence of an old culture based on body consciousness, where the soul's forgotten itself, and therefore ego and dependency are ruling all our institutions and all our ideas, and we're moving into a soul-conscious culture once again, which is back the original culture, and that the role of God is to influence that shift by just telling us who we are.
Charlie, this is a very interesting proposition, and one that in different versions is in so many religions, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
That at some point maybe there's the second coming or the Messiah of Judaism, and there's the Maitreya Buddha, there's a recoming of the energy of God into our planet and an evolution of people. And Are you saying that this is possible right now?
Absolutely, Kim. I mean, you know, I've been a meditator for 45 years, and I only in this last year, so many people, whether they're meditators or not, have said they feel there's a huge change going on in our world. They can feel it, something not superficial. There's a fundamental shift going on, and changes are not easy in a way. And so we're sort of, I almost see it as a shift from a really old story based on a whole body conscious culture. It's shifting. Once I was in Switzerland, and I went to where two rivers met. One was crystal clear and the other was dirty. It was amazing. And when they came together, there was all this upheaval, you know, before they went further. But it's a confluence of an old story and a new story. And I think what we're talking about is that at this time, to change the world, we have to change deeply ourselves. And to get the power, this relationship with God is absolutely where it comes from. And it's not just a belief, it's not a devotional religious set of practices. It's like I tune in, I, the soul, see the Supreme through my third eye, the form, and I touch and I remember. And the more I remember, it's almost like I put myself under the influence of God. The more I remember the past and people, I put myself under my old influences, and that's sort of constantly disturbing me. And that's why really what I've learned from the Brahma Kumaris is to live my life, fulfill my responsibilities, but remember God. You know, once I was in Guatemala in Central America, and I went to this church, and there was a little statue of a little monk. It was only about 4 or 5 feet high, because apparently that was the monk's size. You know, he became famous through a whole of Central. He walked, he never took a horse or anything, and he'd just knock on a door, and when the door opened, he would just say, "Remember God." That's all he ever said. He went around, and I've often remembered that in a way, when I really connect, because when I remember, I connect my consciousness, it changes. And when I remember the highest being, it shifts something deeply in me.
Charlie, I'd like to ask a difficult question on behalf of those who might have someone asking them that difficult question.
Yeah.
Uncle so-and-so does not believe in God. They are confirmed atheist. They believe in the Enlightenment, in scientific principles. What do I say to them?
Yeah, I feel, you know, I can relate to it in a way, because in my teenage years, I used to say I was an atheist, because I found it hard to believe in the concepts I was given. And it was my immaturity at that time too, but and I think a lot of people struggle, and science is often, you can go 1 + 1 and you get a result, whereas spiritual things are a bit ethereal. But, you know, I often feel people who sort of stepped away from institutions, it's often not so much God, but it's the institutions that they find hard. Now, I really love religions, but institutions are, you know, groups of human beings, and we all have flaws, so institutions are very flawed. And we can see the world now, whether it's the business world, the political world, but the religious world, is a lot of negativity in that world. And a lot of people think, well, listen, they're the people purporting to God, and look at what's happening, the abuse and things going on in all these institutions. But I think it's just that collectively we human souls have all lost our power. Because in a way we've maybe had a belief in a concept of God, but when I really connect and have a relationship with God, I think that's when a major healing really begins to happen. And so I think that if people who sort of find it hard to accept that religious view of God, open themselves to the idea that you don't have to do rituals, you don't have to go to temples or churches or anything, you don't have to do any of that. It's just really to experiment, and experiment to be a soul, and experience what that feels like, and experiment how to communicate to the Supreme Soul through the power of your third eye. You don't have to go through all the rituals and the beliefs and things like that, I don't feel, to connect.
So this is a very interesting answer. I think what you're saying is none of us have a right to change anyone else's belief.
That's right.
But we also have the opportunity to encourage people, particularly of a scientific mind, to perform one more experiment, an experiment in human consciousness.
Yeah,
you know, and
exactly.
this is an interesting thought, because my experience has been, I know a lot of scientists, and I find them generally to be an incredibly open bunch of people, because there are people who are looking for the mysteries of the world to find solutions. And certainly I wanted to say for myself, I have such a gratitude to modern science. It's enabled us to progress so much as a species in such a difficult time. So it's not like there's a camp here and a camp there.
Yeah.
There's the opportunity to experiment in using some of the principles of scientific, understanding as spiritual beings in our lives.
100%, Kim. I mean, there's so much beauty in religion, there's so much beauty in science too, because actually if you look at everyone wants to make the world a better place. It's just sometimes in the process things get a little bit lost. I think in the old days, in past centuries, a lot of people had blind faith in religion, and in the so-called modern world, people sort of look down on that a little bit. But sometimes I think we've supplemented for blind faith in science, because science might tell us something. I don't think it's this problem of science, and we just believe it because it's science. They will tell us that the universe is this long, or that's anything. We just believe. Now, in a way, we're the modern equivalent of having blind faith in science, and I think that I once met a man called Professor Paul Davies, who's a very world-famous scientist, physicist, and he wrote a book, and in the book, I opened it and I was reading it when I was in his office, and it said, "The ultimate unknowable for science is a point." Because a point is beyond matter. A point exists, but it's not. You can't define it. Has no length, breadth, width. The soul is a point. And I think often this enigma, the incredible, how amazing is medical science? But the soul is the life force in the body. And when the soul leaves the body, it's called a dead body. And because we can't physically actually put it under a microscope and see a soul, because it's a non-physical entity, then some may say, well, does it really exist? But because we can't touch or feel something, of course things exist, Thoughts exist. Do they have a material form to them? It's a bit philosophical, all this stuff, but I think it's saying is to open our minds to new possibilities, that's all. And that really, I think spirituality is just about living a beautiful life and really exploring the relationship with a divine being, a supreme being, because I think it puts a lot of life in perspective. When I know God, I know who I am, and then I can sort of make sense of the material world. Like Plato said, to understand the world out there, I first have to know and experience who I am as the eternal soul.
Charlie, that's a profound, detailed and very respectful answer. The only thing I would add to that is that we have such gratitude to the scientific principles in our age, and one thing in particular, which is that very rarely does a scientist say, this is how it is.
Yeah.
And they say, this is how it is as we understand it right now.
Yeah.
And so this sense of a living investigation that is at the heart of the whole history of science really has more in common with the spiritual realm than it might seem at first. And I've certainly found many scientists to be very open to spiritual experiences, to being able to say that there is a mystery And I cannot understand everything in that mystery, and so I can still explore that.
Yeah, that's lovely, Kim, because sometimes I think as a meditator, you're like a spiritual scientist, because you're trying different thoughts and awarenesses that create a new flavor or feeling in your mind. And what you just said, a scientist may do an experiment 1,000 times to get a result. Now, sometimes we sit to meditate, it doesn't work that well, so we think, oh, it doesn't work. But actually, a true spiritual practitioner is like a spiritual scientist. We keep trying. And we learn how to sit down and convert the knowledge of the soul into such a deeply profound feeling of peace. That's like experimenting, isn't it? The more I become detached from my body, it's almost like I enter the world of calm, then I enter the world of peace, then I enter a world of deep silence. It's like I do the experimentation, like a spiritual scientist. I keep learning and, upgrading the quality of my experiments.
Charlie, this has been such an interesting... Maybe we moved on a slight left turn in our discussion, but I've loved this turn because this is a very interesting way for us to think, because it's a teaching about all the boundaries we set ourselves.
Yeah.
It's so easy, isn't it, to always say, this person believes this, so I can only have this discussion with them. Whereas really what we're saying is, in the end, this very simple teaching, all of us are the same, all of us are souls. There is a soul who has not taken a body, and that soul is worthy of communication. And if we make that communication, something incredible can happen.
Oh, that's beautifully put, Kim.
Yeah.
It's really wonderful. And I think that, I think as a spiritual person too, like you said, we really love and appreciate science because it's like helping us understand the material world and our bodies that the souls inhabit, and how to have the highest respect for nature and the world of matter. And to me, that's what the environmental movement is really about. It's a sort of a spiritual thing. We're souls, and that really, if we forget who we are, we will destroy our natural environment. But if we remember who we are, we dance a beautiful dance together with deep love and respect.
Charlie, thank you. I think it's time to have a silent dance.
Let us sit quietly and prepare myself to communicate to the Supreme, the highest destination for the human spirit. Feel yourself letting go the awareness of the limited. My body is a wonderful instrument, but it is temporary. And as I become aware of my permanent self, I become aware of my permanent beloved, my permanent parent, the relationship with the divine, with the Supreme, with God. I see God as the Supreme Soul, the eternal form of a point which never changes. And in that being is an ocean of love, an ocean of peace, an ocean of purity, an ocean of happiness. And in this union I feel that energy entering me and recharging my soul battery. I realize I was pure as I forgot myself and became body conscious. I lost my purity and my happiness. But this relationship is making me pure once again. And as I do become pure, I deeply appreciate all other souls around me, and even the material world, and how science is helping us understand this material world. And I begin to understand how when we lose our purity, the consciousness of souls affects our material environment. But as I become soul conscious once again, I value the material world around me, nature, the animals. It's a reflection of our consciousness. And so as I meditate, my vibrations influence me. They influence those I love around me. They influence the whole human family. But they also influence nature. Om Shanti.
Thank you, Charlie. Dear friends, we've had a good experience here, thinking about this essential relationship, sometimes a forgotten relationship, one that we can renew this very day. No matter who we are, no matter what we believe, we have the birthright to fulfill this relationship. Thank you, Charlie, for another beautiful session and for guiding us through some quite beautiful and difficult at times waters.
Thank you so much, Kim. Look forward to talking again soon.